I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Tin Ho. Thank you for listening to the Justice Journal podcast. This podcast series engages our community in issues that impact public safety and shares how our office is ensuring justice in the courtroom and in the community while achieving our mission of Semper Justitia, which in Latin means always just.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Justice Journal podcast. I'm your host, Shelley Oreo. Last episode, we featured Rhonda Campbell, who lost her baby sister Irene to a repeat DUI offender in the 1980s. This episode, we are continuing our focus on the consequences of driving under the influence of alcohol and/or drugs, otherwise known as DUI and DUID, by speaking to Cody Spaeth, who lost her father Stan Spaeth to another four-time repeat DUI offender in April of 2009. I'm also joined by Deputy District Attorney Greg Hayes, who oversees the office's DUI and DUID prosecution and education program. Welcome, Cody and Greg. Cody, I'm going to start with you. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Myself now. I'm 28-year-old. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I provide therapy / mental health. That's kind of a little bit about who I am right now.
Perfect. And Greg?
My name is Gregory Hayes. I'm a deputy district attorney here in Sacramento County. I've been a deputy district attorney for 8.5 years. I've worked in various roles for the district attorney's office in that time. I'm currently a lead on the misdemeanor team. I oversee DUIs and drug DUIs. I also do education, training, and outreach. This podcast is part of a 4-part podcast series, and it's the second podcast. Funding for this program was provided by a grant from the California Office of Traffic Safety through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
So Cody, can you tell us about your family and your relationship with your father?
Yeah, my dad was, he was 54 when he passed away. And I mean, my relationship with my dad, like my dad was, I don't know, I guess I often would say like my dad was my parent. My older sister is deaf, so my whole family uses sign language to communicate. And my mom just was more fluent at sign language. And so my sister would kind of go to my mom for more things and I would go to my dad for things. Of course, you could go to both parents, but I would just definitely say like my dad was like my point person for a lot of things. I think people can like idolize people when they pass away, but like when I say that my dad was my hero, like it wasn't like a hero that runs around with like a cape or anything like that. It was a very like realistic view of like just a safe space. He had a big belly. He was overweight. He would lay in bed with like his shirt off and like a plate on his stomach. He liked Saturday cartoons. And on Sundays we went to like my grandma's to church and then dinner or lunch at grandma's. Like he was a really real person. He worked for the same company for years since that he started out when he was 16 until the age of 54. He was very loyal to people, very, very loyal and kind and funny. He had asthma. He rode motorcycles and dirt bikes, and he really prioritized camping every summer for us as a family.
My parents were married for 23 years and dated for like 7 years before that. And they were like truly in love, went to motorcycle races for date nights and, you know, did fun things together. My dad, he had a bald spot on his head. And me and my sister, we would draw on it in Sharpie. And I just vividly remember like Easter egg, we would put like an Easter egg on his bald spot when he was sleeping. And I just remember like he would even bring his dog to church, the family dog. He brought it to church every week. And just like a lot of things I remember about my dad, he put ice in his milk. Like he liked his milk cold. and, really loved pickles out of the jar, things like that. But I remember that my older sister being deaf, my dad really tried hard to learn sign language for her, and what wasn't completely fluent. But I just remember that he had signed up for classes at like Sacramento City College, and that the professor is deaf, and he had kept going to the classes, and ultimately like just was not passing. And the teacher had told him, you can't keep failing this. And I remember my dad said something like, failure isn't an option. And he had explained to the professor that, his kid is deaf and he needed to do what he could. And I remember that teacher just letting him not enroll in the class, but just attend every day, and that he could, and just sit in the back of the class.
Oh,
And I just remember thinking about like that kind of commitment to family. Just like that, he was someone that like, I just like is irreplaceable. And like irreplaceable to his family, and irreplaceable. I mean, when my dad passed away, it took like them hiring 3 people to make up the work that like my dad did. And he's someone that's like irreplaceable in our life. Like I can never find another him. And yeah, I just think about my father's character and the way he loved his parents and went over there every Sunday, or was like anything that anyone needed, he was dependable upon. What I think of when I think of him right away is just someone who's like, it was an advocate for me. And like, just like the ultimate team member with my mom as well.
hmm.
I think my dad would have been the best grandfather. And so I think about like, if my sister and her husband decide to have kids, like I think I miss like those memories that we don't even get to see. And I think that that's like really hard to like think about, because I've lost so many things that I remember about my dad. And now it's like the opportunity to see him or to know him in other capacities, like a grandfather, or as he gets older, it was also stolen.
Yeah.
So I miss what I don't know.
Can you now talk us through the day you and your family lost your father, and however much you want to share about that, what happened, and how your family found out?
Yeah. It was April 18th of 2009. It actually happened to be spring break for my school that week. And I think as a result, a couple of weeks earlier, like the school districts like prepare for spring break and want kids to be responsible. So a lot of times they do like a prevention program like every 15 minutes. And they had done that at my sister's high school that year. So I mean, that definitely played into my thoughts, because it was that night, April 18th, and it was spring break. And I didn't grow up like very affluent. So we didn't have cable or anything like that. But I remember that I was like up late at night, and I went to the fridge and I opened the door and I looked at the food and there was nothing there. And I opened the door and my mom told me to shut the fridge door. Like grab what you want and shut it. And I remember saying to her, like, why are you still awake? And she said, your dad should have been off work by now. And my dad worked selling alarms for an alarm company. And then he also was a like Securitas security guard. And I think he was doing security for a quinceañera that night in Elk Grove, and was coming home from that event. And so he should have been home by now, is what my mom had said. And I remember just telling her she was so over dramatic, and that my dad would be in the driveway any minute. And she said something didn't feel right in her stomach. And so she was flipping through, back then we had phone books. So she was flipping through a phone book and calling, I mean, every emergency room, Kaiser South Sac, Kaiser Moore, CC Davis. I mean, calling everywhere. And they all said, I remember my mom saying like, this is what my husband looked like. This is his weight and his height. And he has he was riding a motorcycle and this is his license plate. And every emergency room was like, yeah, we don't have someone there. And so my mom called the police and she said, I need to file a missing persons report. And, they told her someone has to be missing for a certain like set of time. And, when did you last talk to him? And she was like, he responded to my text 2 hours ago. And they're like, yeah, we're not gonna politely, kind of said that they weren't going to file a missing persons report quite yet. And my mom had cut them off, and she had said, "This is his license plate. And if you don't tell me where he is, I will go looking myself." And something about telling them the license plate, they just put my mom on they were really polite, and they put her on a brief hold. And when they came back, all they said is, "Please don't leave your home. We are sending someone your way." And so I think for me, I knew that my mom would have went to the route to where my dad was working at Elk Grove. And I don't think that they wanted her to find him that way. I don't think that it would normally send someone out to your home at that for, just because someone hasn't responded to a text in 2 hours. So I think my mom had an idea, but I was 14 at the time. So I don't think that I really connected the dots. My older sister, who's deaf, Janie, she was sleeping in her room. And so I don't know. I just remember that maybe time passed really quickly, and there were two men in all black uniform, and there was 2 cop cars and 1 black cop car. And they showed up, and I just remember reading the words "coroner" off the corner of his shirt. And it's just so hard to lose a parent, but I just remember my mom falling to the ground, and she was just on the ground, kind of wailing. And I just started arguing with the coroner, which probably, I don't think that there's any normal response in this situation. But I just remember even I think I might have just been I just remember saying "this isn't a joke," and that was probably me in denial. But I remembered saying, they did an every 15 minutes program at my sister's high school last week. I remember saying those exact words, and I didn't even know it was related to a DUI. At that point, I just thought that in that every 15 minutes program, they sent people out and they talked about this. So it didn't click. Remember that back then, there was flip phones in 2009, and the coroner's ringtone was the exact same ringtone as my dad's phone, and it rang. And I just remember feeling, and it's probably just the normal setting on phones back then, but I just remember feeling out of my body. And there were chaplains that were there, and they sat with us, and my dad was a father to some of my nieces and nephews, or maybe not a father, but he was just a really involved uncle. And I mean, we spent Sundays at grandma's every Sunday. So my mom realized that she had to tell people. And I just remember going to my sister's room, because when you have a deaf sibling, they are the last to find out about a lot of things, and that sucks. And that was my first thought, is she needs to know. So I don't know if my mom went with me to tell her, if I just went there and did it. But I just remember shaking or tapping my sister and then signing to her. And that, I didn't even ever say it verbally yet, but I just signed, "Our father is dead," and woke her up and kind of had told her that. And I'd say within 10-15 minutes, our house was packed with my aunts and uncles, or my grandparents, who was my dad Stan's parents, and people. And that's probably why the cops were still there at that point, because when I don't know for sure how this works, but I just remember as a kid, why are the cops still here? I kind of knew it had to be a crime at that point versus just the coroner. But the law enforcement asked to talk to my mom in private, and so they had pulled her to the kitchen, and they had her sit down. And I just remember putting my back up against the wall and listening. And I remember just thinking, this is my life too. I'm 14, yeah, but I need to know what's going on. And I'm also the one to tell my sister and keep her in the loop. So it was, nosy. I was not supposed to hear what was being said. This was an adult conversation. But I just remember them saying, "It appears that this was caused by a multiple offender drunk driver. We will need to see you in court on Monday." And that was all that was kind of said. And we'll have someone reach out with the department and everything like that. But they didn't give us too much information. We didn't know a name or anything like that. And there was no book on like what court is like or how long that's going to last. And so that was how we were told. I just think it's like profound. Like I have childhood memories and I don't remember them, but I remember that night like super crystal clear. Like I could tell you what people were wearing, and it's sad to me that some of my memories with my dad have faded, but I like will never forget that night.
Can you talk us through what happens from there in terms of the court process, your family's involvement in that? And I don't want to spend too much time talking about the offender, but what you know about that person.
Yeah. So first, I think it's important to just like acknowledge that a DUI killing someone is a lot different than cancer or other medical diagnoses or deaths. And also, I just want to preference this, like no death is worse or best than the other, but they are different. And so when someone dies by, a crime or in a regard this way, like there's a court trial and you're not told that when you're 14. And so, there's really not a lot of closure even after a funeral. So for me, like court started when I was 14 and then it didn't end until like the October before my 17th birthday. So it's like 2.5 years. So that was my freshman year of high school all the way up until my senior year. So that was my whole entire high school experience. I was in court for like a month and then I would go back to school for a month and then be in court for a week. And then, and it was something that I wasn't going to miss. For me, like I felt like I was 14. So I put like a lot of emphasis on like needing to see this through. And I had a lot of hope in like the justice system too. So for me, like going to court was healing, and that's every victim has a choice of whether or not they, for some people it might be more traumatizing to go to court, and that's honorable too. I can't, I only can speak for myself. But what that was like for me was we showed up to court. We had mad victim advocates. We had a victim advocate from the district attorney's office who was amazing. But I mean, it was really hard. Like it was really hard. There were crime scene pictures of my father projected in courtroom screens. They talked about the velocity and the speed and the thrust of at what my father was hit at, and how she walked away, and how a mother and daughter behind her that she had like swerved and missed. She had first swerved and missed. They were subpoenaed because she didn't hit them, but she did hit my dad. And then it was an off-duty cop officer that testified because he showed up to the scene and saw her trying to run away and kind of had her stay until she could be arrested. So it was these people, like what court was like for me was crime scene pictures and people just like proving to me that this happened, because I was in a state of denial. So I think it proved to me that this happened. So it was hard. Her family was on one side of the courtroom. Our family was on the other. My sister got a full ride scholarship to a school in New York, and decided to take it. She had to take it. We would not have been able to afford college on my mom's income. And that meant that she missed the whole court trial. And so she came home from school and, would just see like, oh, dad's car is not here. The rooms are different. Like we've sold some of the dune buggies or things that we had of his because we had to pay bills or, certain things. And so every time she came home, for her, it was like evidence of him being gone. But for me, I had that evidence ongoing. The first day that we showed up to court, though, there was a kid that was my age and his name was Mason. And I said, hey, Mason, what are you doing here? And he said, I'm here to support my aunt. And his aunt was a woman who killed my dad. And so like later I learned that she had a son, and I was 14 at the time, and I believe her son, the woman who killed my dad, her son was 11 years old. And so even though I was going through this immense grief of losing my father, I was going through like such anger for this kid. Like, why wasn't his mom there? Like, why would she do this to him? Like, what does this mean for him, kind of thing. And so I think when we talk about like court, I think we also like the defendant is a person and there's consequences for her actions, but the cost isn't just me and my family, like it was also to her son too. And so my heart grieves for that also.
So what about the end result? I know you might not have understood all the ins and outs during that time.
Oh, I did.
You did. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can tell you that our lawyers would get frequent emails from me. They even were like, you should go to law school. And I was like, I don't want to go to law school. I just want to know how this is going to end for like my mental health. But I would send them case laws. I would research everything. I would, call the office. I'd call MAD. Well, what about this? Or for me, I could not go into another courtroom and not know what may or may not happen then. So I researched preliminary. I knew every part of what at 14, 15, 16, because if I went in blind and wasn't prepared, it was just going to be just like being blinded by my dad dying. The result of that in criminal case is she did get second-degree murder. And that's because I believe of like the Watson advisement. So because it was her fourth DUI, but the end result was that it was a big argument in the case about whether or not she should have manslaughter or second-degree murder. And that Watson advisement is when you have multiple DUIs, you take a DUI class to get your license back, and you sign something at the end of it that says, I am very well educated on this issue now. That basically says like, I know that if I do this again, I could kill someone. Like that's kind of the wording in the Watson advisement is this, I'm aware of this. So then when you go to court and you have sign that you're aware of the consequences of it, you can't deny knowledge. You can't deny, you can't kind of deny it. So the argument was whether or not she blacked out, she was aware of the impacts of her behavior before when she was conscious and made a conscious choice. And so she did get second-degree murder. It was supposed to be 15 to life. And then we were given a letter from the parole board and she was released early, like August of 2021. And there were 2 parole hearings where my family was on Zoom. My sister was able to attend that with and have an interpreter on screen also. And kind of hear her speak about the things that she's done since she's been in custody. I actually, when I turned about 21, I was really trying to heal. And I grew up very religious. So there was some messaging where I was told that I didn't have a strong faith if I hadn't forgiven the woman who killed my dad. And people told me that I needed to forgive. I now hold the very strong belief that telling someone, a victim of crime, how to feel is a boundary violation. Just like as a mental health counselor, I think that was really damaging for me to think that I didn't have a strong faith in God because I hadn't forgiven or had gotten to that point. And if someone is a victim of crime, you shouldn't tell them how to act or respond. This is about DUI, but also like if someone is raped, you don't tell that person that they need to forgive or that they're any less for forgiving. So for me, but at that time, I really believed that I needed to forgive. I had really hard feelings about it because I don't feel safe with her out. And I don't feel that jails are very rehabilitative. I've been a social worker in a jail, at the same jail on I Street. I was a social worker there for a couple of years. And so it's hard because I believe in rehabilitating people. And I also just felt safer having her world separate from mine. And now our worlds are out together.
Greg, I'm going to bring you back in. This case was prosecuted about 12 years ago. So I'm not sure if any changes have happened in DUI laws, but can you just talk us through the current DUI laws that we have?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So there are a few different things I'd like to talk about, starting with Watson murders, which is what happened in the case with Cody's dad. So a Watson murder is a second-degree murder. A defendant can be charged with a Watson murder if they kill somebody while they're driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and they had malice aforethought. So a murder doesn't simply mean taking someone's life. In the eyes of the law, it means you did something that resulted in a person dying, and you did it in a state of mind known as malice aforethought. And that essentially means that you knew in advance that you could hurt or kill somebody, and you didn't care. and it didn't stop you, and you did it anyway. So in the case that we were talking about with Cody's dad, the defendant previously had numerous DUIs, had taken a MAD course. It sounds like had signed an advisement through the MAD course that she knew how dangerous drinking and driving was. But I'll also say in Sacramento County, when people plead to DUIs, they are advised as well by the judge that driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs is a dangerous activity, and that if you kill somebody, you can be charged with a second-degree murder. So that's exactly what happened in that case. And my understanding is she was sentenced to the maximum amount, which on a Watson murder is 15 years to life. You can also be charged with a vehicular manslaughter. There are two main penal code sections for that. There's 191.5A, which is with gross negligence, and 191.5B, which is with ordinary negligence. A person who's convicted of the vehicular manslaughter with gross negligence faces up to 10 years in state prison for that. Somebody who is convicted on a regular negligence vehicular manslaughter could get up to 4 years. Those sentences can be enhanced if somebody has a previous serious or violent strike. For example, it can double their sentence on those cases, or if it's a third strike, can give them up to 25 years to life. There's also a standard felony DUI, and those are covered primarily by two code sections. There's Vehicle Code Section 23152 and Vehicle Code Section 23153. Among those are subsection A, B, F, and G, which relate to driving while impaired, driving while above 0.08, driving while you have drugs in your system, and driving with a mixture of alcohol and drugs. Any of those things will result in a felony. The way you can get a felony is if you have 3 prior misdemeanors in the last 10 years, or if you commit a DUI that results in injury. So if it's your very first DUI and it results in injury, you can wind up with a felony. The maximum sentence on a felony is typically 3 years. Again, those can be enhanced. There's a great bodily injury enhancement. There's 2 options under Penal Code Section 12022.7. There's option A, which gives a 3-year enhancement, and option B, or subsection B, which will give you a 5-year enhancement. And again, like I mentioned on the vehicular manslaughters, if somebody has a prior strike from serious or violent behavior and convictions, they can get their sentence doubled, or they could get up to 25 years to life. Somebody doesn't qualify for a felony because it's their first, second, or third DUI, and it doesn't result in injury. The same code sections apply for misdemeanors. You can get up to a year on a misdemeanor DUI, and on anybody's third misdemeanor DUI, there's a minimum amount of time, which is 120 days. And so that's kind of the state of the current DUI law.
So Greg, I know you didn't obviously prosecute the case against Cody's father's case, but do you have any thoughts on that case, just for me to know about it?
I do. You know, that case is so tragic, and the human loss is very real and substantial in all of these sorts of cases. People are affected for their entire life. I don't think the heartache ever goes away. And the really sad part about it all is Cody's case is not a one-off incident here in Sacramento County. Every year, there are dozens of people in Sacramento County who lose their life to DUI drivers. Last year in 2022, I think there were around 20 DUI vehicular manslaughters that were charged here by our office. Some of them were charged as Watson murders. And these are significant crimes, and they're completely preventable if people just made the correct decisions to simply not drive when they're intoxicated.
So Cody, as a surviving family member, what do you think, or what would you like to see to help further try to deter DUI and DUID drivers?
There's so much stuff. I don't want to get political on here, but I do think that being involved in the measures that your community passes is important. There were laws that were trying to make Lyft and Uber, more expensive or equal to taxis. And, I'm not going to state my opinion on those things, but I think just knowing how changing policies in certain ways makes things less accessible. And I think that people profit off of DUIs. And I mean that in the sense of breathalyzers can be required, but there's really very few people that offer breathalyzers in cars, and there's no cap on what they can charge. And so for me, like DUIs is a really, really big thing that my family experiences, and I want resources to be affordable. I want Lyft and Uber and taxis to be affordable, and I don't want people charging ridiculous amounts for breathalyzers in the car and kind of looking at like this is a problem to benefit on. And I would like, I don't know, when it comes to policies, I'd like first offense drunk driving to be taken seriously. I would like Instagram ads and Facebook ads to stop popping up to tell me how to get out of my first DUI.
So Cody, I can sort of see the how this has impacted you all through your life. But why don't you tell us what your life has been for you and your family, and even now we're almost 14 years since you lost your father, and how that has really impacted you.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. And I am thankful that I was able to be told about resources by the district attorney's victims advocate. I have used all of the therapy, like I capped out, that could have been offered. If your father is killed, you might get like a certain amount of therapy that's paid for through victim services. I've completely used all of it, ran out, which is not embarrassing to say, but it's like I've used all of the therapy that the city would have paid for. And I now am a therapist or a licensed clinical social worker. I worked at the I Street jail for a couple years. I did a whole year there unpaid as a discharge planner, which meant I told people about resources to get drug and alcohol counseling, or where clinics they could go to, or how they could get medication that they needed. I think that it impacted my career. It's completely shaped who I am as a person, and like my ability to see people as a therapist, like when they come into my office with depression or grief from things, or even addiction struggles, and to see them as like a person, and it, you know, how it might impact their children or the family unit. I think tragedy has a way to like completely shatter who you are, or you can try to decide to be built up by it. And I don't want to say I had to go through those things to be the person that I am now, because I don't think that that's fair. But I do think that I am not going to waste the things that I've gone through. And so that's kind of how it's changed for me. My mom is still working. I don't know that she'll be able to retire when she wants to. We went from, she completely changed her career. She was a interpreter at the school district and a teacher's aide, and had summers off for us, but my dad was killed and she couldn't afford that. She dropped out of college a semester way before she graduated. That dream kind of died with her when my dad died, because of the financial responsibility. She worked full time, and she hasn't remarried. She's a fulfilled life through her church community and her family and friends, but that grief is still really there. My sister recently got married to, a man that our whole family really loves, and my dad wasn't there for that wedding, so I got my sister a charm and put it on her bouquet of my dad's face, so that when she walked down the aisle, my dad could be with her.
What motivates you to continue to share your story? I know that sounds like you do quite a bit of speaking.
Yeah, so sometimes I'll speak for MAD's court-ordered classes, and just knowing that the woman who killed my dad went through that class, and you're sitting in a room of 200 people who also need this advisement, because it might also impact someone else in Sacramento's family. Kind of motivates me for that. I go back to my high school and I speak to high schools all the time. I think that motivates me, but it's also really hard when you show up every month to a DUI court-ordered class and there's another batch of 250 DUI offenders every month. And
Wow.
So I think I've done a better job this year and the last few years of being like, I'm actually going to take 4 months off of speaking. You can take me off the rotation. I'm going to check in with my mental health. I'm going to come back, because it is really taxing to tell your life story. Like, this is a huge part of my life, and I don't want to do it every month or every week. And so I do my best to speak when I can. And I also let other victims know, like, if your son was killed by a drunk driver, you don't have to spend the rest of your life telling the story. Like, you can live out your son's memory in lots of ways, and do the things that he wished he could have done, like go skydiving in that person's memory. So I try to do a balance of, like, I ride a motorcycle now because my dad rode motorcycles And I also speak for my dad. So I try to do things to balance how I can get back and check in with myself about when it's healthy for me.
Well, I know you're very passionate and an effective speaker. Greg actually is the one who suggested that we invite you on today. He saw you speak at a Real DUI Court and Schools program. So I don't know, Greg, what stuck out to you about Cody's ability to effectively tell her story?
Well, at this high school assembly, she was amazing. Let me paint a picture for you a little bit. So we're at St. Francis High School. It's an all girls Catholic school here in Sacramento, and we're in the gymnasium. There was about 1,000 students who were in attendance in this program. I've done the Real DUI in Court program a few times before. I had never done it with Cody. It was the first time I had ever met her. The program typically starts with a movie, and then there's a plea, and things were kind of going along normal that day. And then Cody got up to speak. Now, I had no idea what Cody was going to say. I didn't research her before. I didn't know her background. I didn't know her story. But she was so genuine and heartfelt in her presentation to the students that day. You could literally hear a pin drop between the words when she spoke. And her speech was so profound that I found myself having tears come to my eyes. And that is not something that happens with me a whole lot. But the speech was very, very intense and very, I'm not sure passionate is the right word, but you could really tell how heartfelt it was from Cody. And so at some point I turned around during the assembly to look at the 1,000 or so students who were behind me. And if I'm being completely honest with you, I don't think I saw a single dry eye in the place. Everybody in that gym was crying, and they all felt, and to some degree, the pain that Cody went through. It really was a completely amazing experience.
So let's talk a little bit about prevention efforts. Greg, we talked a little bit about the Real DUI Court and Schools program. I don't know if you want to say more about that and some of the other things that I know our office is working on prevention-wise.
Thanks, Shelley. I'll talk a little bit more about the Real DUI Court program. We've been partnering with that program for a number of years. It's put on by a organization known as Arrive Alive California, and it's run by a woman named Angela Webb. It's a great program. Here in Sacramento County, our office partners with Arrive Alive. We do multiple assemblies both in the fall semester and in the spring semester. It's part of our education, training, and outreach program. And what we do is we go to these different high schools. They typically have large assemblies. It starts with a movie, like I mentioned before, that's played, that shows some of the impacts that DUIs have, including death. We do a plea where a real defendant comes in to the assembly. They're represented by an attorney, and a plea is taken. And it's taken by an actual judge here in the Sacramento County Superior Court. Typically after that, there are a number of speeches. I talk, the defense attorney talks, the judge talks, and then normally there's a guest speaker. So somebody like Cody or somebody from MAD, sometimes it's a law enforcement person. And then the students, one of the really cool parts of the program that I love is the students then get to ask questions. And they will ask questions of the attorneys. Sometimes they'll ask questions of the defendant. And if I remember right, at St. Francis, they asked a lot of questions of Cody. And the goal through those programs is really to educate young people on DUIs, their true impacts, and help them make better decisions related to drinking and driving. That's just one of the things that we do under my grant through the Office of Traffic Safety. We also do a Citizens Academy here at the DA's office. We do a youth academy. I also do police training to help train police officers on how to do complete and thorough investigations into DUIs, with the goal of all of that in a way to help prevent DUIs and to guarantee or ensure that when something tragic does happen, the criminal justice system holds a person accountable. Those efforts are really important in many ways, particularly with young people, because the leading cause of death for people between ages 16 and 25 is DUI.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Cody, you shared a little bit about some of the other things that you're doing prevention-wise. I don't know if you want to add anything to that. And then after, I'm going to have you have our closing words here.
I guess I speak to high schools and to DUI classes and do things like this because I have this like overarching essential core belief that all life matters. And so like for me, I think when my dad had died, I remember being 14 and not really being able to process it. But I remember just telling myself, like, you just have to live long enough to see how this could play out. And that's really sad for like a 14-year-old to have that thought process. And I think that that's what kept me living through high school. And I think that knowing like when the verdict was, probably the max of what we could have gotten, that I didn't even really feel relief, and I had to find other things to start living for. Like I had to move the milepost because my depression was so bad, to the next thing and to the next thing. And when I speak to these high schools, like we speak about not driving drunk, but I also think just taking a second to like check in and remind people that like we're doing these programs because we believe life matters. And I think like just like being passionate about mental health and like suicide prevention, and like knowing that, wanting people to know about resources and support out there. And I also want people to continue to find a life worth living. And so I think I just want to end it on that note of like, life matters. And that's what we're here for.
Great. Thanks so much, Cody. Well, thanks again, Cody and Greg. I really do think that these discussions do help, and they do make a difference. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Justice Journal podcast. You can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and I hope you share them with your family, friends, and colleagues.